Tillman had spent 23 years behind the wheel of 18-wheelers, logging over 2 million miles across the American landscape. The cab of his Kenworth T680 was more familiar to him than his own bedroom. The worn leather seat, molded perfectly to his frame, the collection of small mementos stuck to the dashboard, the particular rattle from the glove compartment that started around 65 mph. At 51, Ray was what other drivers called highway-wise. He knew which truck stops served decent food, which stretches of interstate were poorly maintained, and which areas had overzealous highway patrol. He'd witnessed the gradual transformation of America from the unique vantage point of his cab, towns expanding, others withering, farms becoming subdivisions, and once busy factories standing empty. But Highway 50 across Nevada was different. It hadn't changed. It refused to change. Nicknamed the loneliest road in America, this desolate 287-mile stretch cut through vast expanses of desert and mountain ranges, connecting small, isolated communities that seemed frozen in time. Cell service was spotty at best, non-existent at worst. The two-lane highway could go hours without seeing another vehicle. It was beautiful in its emptiness, but unforgiving to the unprepared. Ray typically avoided Highway 50. The lack of facilities and the isolation made it impractical for his usual routes. But a bridge collapse on I-80 had forced a detour, and his dispatcher had routed him across Nevada's empty heart to deliver industrial equipment to Reno. He'd started the crossing at dawn from Ely, figuring he could make Fallon by early evening, then push on to Reno the following day. The morning passed uneventfully as the Great Basin landscape scrolled by his windows. Sagebrush plains giving way to rugged mountain passes, then back to vast valleys that stretched to distant mountain ranges. The October air was crisp and clear, the sky an endless blue dome above the empty land. Around 2 p.m., Ray's radio crackled to life. "Westbound on 50. You got your ears on? This is eastbound coming your way." Ray reached for his CB. Human contact was welcome out here. "This is westbound. Got you. Eastbound. What's your 20? "Just passing through Austin. Got something strange to report. Been hearing the same voice on the radio for the past hour. Woman asking for help. Thought it was someone playing games, but it's getting weird. Over." Ray frowned. Austin was about 40 miles behind him. "Haven't heard anything like that. What's she saying?" "Over." "Says her name's Rebecca. Car broke down. Needs help. Keeps saying she's at milepost 346 just past the canyon. Thing is, I checked my map. There's no milepost 346 on Highway 50. Numbers don't go that high. Over." "Probably just someone pulling your leg," Ray replied. "Kids with a CB playing trucker." Over. "That's what I thought too. But she sounds scared. Real scared. And the transmission is crystal clear 1 minute, full of static the next. Like she's going in and out of range, except I keep hearing her in the same spots. Over." "Well, I'll keep my ears open," Ray said. "Safe travels, eastbound. Over and out." Ray dismissed the conversation as he continued westward. The sun inched toward the jagged mountain peaks, transforming the landscape into a photographer's dream of golden light and purple shadows. He'd have to find a place to stop soon. Driving these roads after dark wasn't advisable. Too many deer and wild horses that could appear without warning. That's when he first heard her. "Hello? Is anyone there? My car broke down. I need help. I'm at milepost 346, just past the canyon. Please, if anyone can hear me." The voice was female, young-sounding, tinged with desperation. Ray glanced at his radio. He hadn't touched it since his earlier conversation. "This is Ray Tillman, westbound on 50. I hear you. But there's no milepost 346 on this highway. Can you give me another landmark?" Over. Silence answered him then. Hello? Is anyone there? This is Rebecca Scheller. My car broke down at milepost 346, just past the canyon. It's getting dark. Please help. It was the exact same message, word for word, with the same inflections. Like a recording. Ray tried again. Rebecca, this is Ray. I hear you, but I need more information. What kind of car are you driving? Can you see any town lights? Over. Again, the same message repeated. Ray checked his odometer. He was passing milepost 152, not even close to 300, let alone 346. For the next 20 miles, the voice came through every few minutes. Always the same message, always unanswering to his responses. Then it stopped as abruptly as it had started. Ray pulled into a small gas station in the town of Austin, the sun now low on the horizon. As he fueled up, he mentioned the strange radio transmission to the attendant, an older man with leathery skin and eyes that had spent decades squinting into the Nevada sun. Heard her yourself, did you? The man asked, not seeming particularly surprised. You know about this? Ray asked. The attendant nodded slowly. Started about 3 years ago. Always the same. Lady named Rebecca, broken down at milepost 346. Thing is, Highway 50 in Nevada only goes up to milepost 436. Numbers run east to west. There is no 346. So it's just someone playing games, Ray concluded. Maybe. The attendant didn't seem convinced. Strange thing is, there was a Rebecca Scheller who went missing out here in 1987, driving cross-country alone. Her car was never found. Ray felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. That's a pretty big coincidence. Highway 50's full of coincidences, the man replied, handing back Ray's credit card. Word of advice, find somewhere to stop before dark. Cold Front Lodge is about 30 miles west. Decent place. Owner's named Mac. Tell him Joe sent you. The sun was setting as Ray pulled into Cold Front Lodge, a modest motel with an attached diner that had seen better days. Only 3 other vehicles were in the parking lot. An old pickup truck, a sedan with California plates, and a highway patrol cruiser. Inside the diner, Ray found the owner, a burly man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard, manning the grill. 2 state troopers sat at the counter, while a middle-aged couple occupied a booth near the window. You must be Mac, Ray said, sliding onto a stool. Joe back in Austin said to tell you he sent me. Mac nodded. Any friend of Joe's is welcome. What'll you have? Ray ordered a burger and coffee, then hesitated before adding, Either of you officers heard anything strange on your radios today? Woman named Rebecca asking for help? The troopers exchanged glances. The older one spoke. You heard her too, huh? Started about 100 miles back. Ray confirmed. Same message repeating. Milepost 346. We get calls about her every couple of months, the younger trooper said. Rebecca Scheller, missing since '87. Car was never found. So it is the same Rebecca, Ray murmured. No, it's not, the older trooper said firmly, because Rebecca Scheller's been dead for 35 years. What you're hearing is someone's sick idea of a joke. How can you be sure she's dead if they never found her? Ray asked. The troopers exchanged another look. The older one sighed. Because they found parts of her, just enough to confirm identity through dental records. The rest was gone. Mountain lions, coyotes. That's the official report. The conversation halted as Mac brought Ray's burger. The troopers finished their coffee and left, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the small diner. As Ray ate, the middle-aged couple at the booth got up to leave. The woman paused at Ray's side. We heard what you were talking about, she said quietly. We heard her too, on our CB. But there's something the officers didn't tell you. Every few years, someone goes missing on this stretch. always in October, always after reporting car trouble near the canyon. No bodies ever found, except her husband took her arm. "Diane, come on, let's go." Except for Rebecca Scheller, she finished. She was the only one they found pieces of. After they left, Ray turned to Mac. "Is that true? People go missing out here?" Mac wiped down the counter methodically before answering. "People go missing everywhere. Desert's an unforgiving place. Get stranded without water, wander off in the wrong direction. Nature takes care of the rest." "But the voice on the radio, is someone playing a cruel joke?" Mac interrupted. "Nothing more. Room 6 is yours. Weather report says storm coming in overnight. Best stay put till morning." Ray took the key, but couldn't shake his unease. In his room, he tried to distract himself with TV, but the ancient set only picked up one fuzzy channel. He eventually turned it off and laid back on the bed, listening to the wind that had begun to pick up outside. His phone showed no service, typical for this area. Out of habit, he checked his own CB radio, which he'd brought in from the truck. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The now familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "My car broke down. I need help. I'm at milepost 346, just past the canyon." Ray sat upright. The woman's voice sounded clearer than before, stronger, almost as if she were closer. "Rebecca, this is Ray. I hear you. Where exactly are you?" "There is no milepost 346 on Highway 50. For the first time, the voice deviated from its script. "Ray, you can hear me? Please help me. I've been trapped here so long. The canyon, the echo. It's dark down here." A chill ran down Ray's spine. "Rebecca, what canyon are you talking about? Highway 50 crosses several canyons. You're close now, at the old road, before they rerouted the highway. It used to be different. Please help me. He's coming back." "Who's coming back?" Ray demanded. "Rebecca, who are you afraid of?" Static filled the channel. Then, "Milepost 396, not 346. The sign is wrong. Turned around. Don't trust." The transmission cut off abruptly. Ray checked his map. Milepost 396 was less than 10 miles west of his current location. Sleep was impossible now. Ray paced his small room, debating what to do. The rational part of his brain insisted this was an elaborate prank. The other part, the part that had survived decades on the road by trusting his instincts, wasn't so sure. At 3:17 a.m., his CB crackled again. This time, it wasn't Rebecca's voice. "Got another one," a man's voice said, low, gruff. "Young woman, California plates, broken down at the canyon. Taking her to the drop now." The voice sounded disturbingly like Max. "Thought you said storm would keep everyone off the road tonight," another voice replied. "Can't predict desperate people," the first voice answered. "Hurry up, sun comes up in 3 hours." Ray moved to the window and carefully peered through the curtains. In the dim light of the parking lot, he could make out 2 figures loading something heavy into the bed of the pickup truck he'd seen earlier. Something person-sized, wrapped in what looked like a tarp. The California sedan was gone. Heart pounding, Ray grabbed his belongings and slipped out the back of his room. He crept to his truck, careful to stay in the shadows. Once inside, he didn't immediately start the engine. Instead, he called 911 on the off chance there might be enough signal for an emergency call. The call connected, but instead of a dispatcher, he heard, "Hello, is anyone there? My car broke down. I need help." Rebecca's voice. Ray dropped the phone and started his truck, pulling out of the parking lot with his lights off. Only when he was a quarter-mile down the highway did he flip them on, accelerating west into the darkness. At milepost 396, he found exactly what the map showed, a sharp bend where the highway curved around a deep canyon. But there was something else. a faded dirt track veering off toward the canyon edge, barely visible in his headlights. An old alignment of the highway, perhaps, from before the modern road was built. Ray slowed, conflicted. Every logical part of him screamed to keep driving, to put as much distance between himself and Cold Front Lodge as possible. But if there was even a chance that the woman from California was still alive. Headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. The pickup truck from the motel. Ray made his decision. He hit the gas, pushing his heavy rig to speeds that were dangerous on the narrow highway. The pickup pursued for several miles before finally falling back. At the next town, Ray went straight to the highway patrol office and reported what he'd seen. The officers were skeptical but agreed to investigate. 3 days later, Ray received a call. They'd found nothing suspicious at Cold Front Lodge. Mac had an alibi for the night in question. He'd been in Reno, verifiable by credit card receipts and hotel security footage. The room Ray described as his didn't exist. The motel had been closed for renovations. Most disturbingly, there was no record of a Rebecca Scheller ever having gone missing in Nevada. Ray never drove Highway 50 again. He requested routes that kept him on major interstates with plenty of traffic and good cell service. But sometimes, late at night in his truck, his CB radio picks up a faint voice. "Hello? Is anyone there? My car broke down. I need help. I'm at milepost 346 just past the canyon. Please, if anyone can hear me." And sometimes, in the background static, he thinks he hears another voice, gruff, low, familiar, saying, "Got another one." I've spent almost 3 decades behind the wheel of Cab 17, my trusty 2017 Peterbilt 389, logging over 4 million miles across America's highways. At 56, I carry the road's imprint in every ache and ache. The permanent forward hunch from leaning into the steering column, calloused hands from endless chain tightening, and eyes crinkled from squinting at sunrises and pitch-black nights. For me, the cab is sanctuary, a dimly lit cocoon of hums, rattles, and the gentle thrum of a diesel engine. Out here, my only companions are gauges, CB static, and the shifting scenery. On that Tuesday, I picked up a routine load of generic auto parts in Detroit's industrial yard at 4:30 a.m. Nothing fragile, no extraordinary deadlines, just the comfortable predictability of aisle A to dock 7. I clipped the CB mic to its holder on channel 19, quiet as usual, and eased onto I-75, watching city lights fade as the sky paled toward dawn. My plan: 18 hours of driving, 1 10-hour break, then back behind the wheel until Oklahoma City. By late morning, I reached Indianapolis, pulling into the Flying J for the customary fuel and coffee run. The ritual never changed. Diesel pump, black coffee, pre-trip checklist, paperwork squared away. 2 other owner ops nodded as we passed, a wordless camaraderie among road warriors. Back in Cab 17, I dialed in my favorite AM oldies station, Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, familiar friends for a long haul. Afternoon found me in Illinois, the land flattening into endless cornfields. I kept cruise at 65, interspersing math podcasts to stave off road hypnosis. My satellite GPS showed clear roads ahead, no traffic advisories. Everything was textbook until milepost 404 on I-80, just west of Joliet. I hit the truck stop just shy of 5 p.m., time for my 10-hour break. Cab 17's sleeper berth awaited, memory foam mattress, blackout curtains, small fan hum. I set my alarm for 3:00 a.m., sure of a solid 6 hours before mandatory restart. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, the gentle snore of the heater in cab, the low rumble of idling rigs, distant clatter of a diner door closing. I stirred at exactly 3:17 a.m. My watch glowed red in the dark. Strange. I'd set it for 3:00. More odd was the silence. No engine hum, no radio crackle, no idling trucks. The cab felt unnaturally still, as though time itself had paused. I cracked one eye open. Dash lights were off, gauges dark, no glow underfoot from the engine. My breath puffed white before me. Cab too cold. I rubbed my face. Battery must have drained after I left the dome light on while dozing. Rookie mistake, but rare. I flipped the dome lamp switch. Dead. I reached for the key in the ignition. Turn. Nothing. No click. No rumble. I cursed. Cab 17's 12-volt system had let me down for the first time in years. I popped the door and hopped down onto the asphalt, the cold biting through my jacket. My breath hung in the air, like specters. Before grabbing jumper cables, I noticed them. 3 deep scratches on the passenger door, nearly a foot long, their edges fresh and jagged. I knelt, shining my mag light across the gouges. They weren't random. Someone had taken deliberate time to scrape them in long, angry strokes. My heart started pounding. Who on God's green earth would crawl onto an interstate shoulder at 3 a.m. just to vandalize a truck? I scanned the empty parking lot. Not a soul, not a silhouette beyond the orange floodlights. My boots crunched gravel as I jogged back to cab 17. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course. The CB mic lay glued to its bracket. I keyed it anyway. Breaker 19, cab 17, need roadside assistance. The speaker hissed, then fell silent. I slashed the squelch dial. Static remained stubbornly mute. Then, my own voice, clipped and hollow, crackled through. Breaker 19, cab 17, need assistance. I nearly dropped the mic. That wasn't echo. It was my voice looped back. I keyed frantically. Who is this? Over. More static, and a low whisper, a rasped breath. Let me in. I'm cold. My blood ran ice cold. I whipped around. Nothing but my rig's towering trailer and the dark sky. I locked the door from the outside, then climbed back in. My seatbelt refused to latch on the first try because my fingers shook so badly. In desperation, I shoved the key into the ignition and turned. The engine coughed to life on one cylinder, merciful enough to let me roll. I backed onto the highway, stalling once when I dented the throttle. Cab 17 shuddered, then engine found itself. I stomped the gas, merging blindly into I-80 traffic, headlights mowing down the night. My adrenaline spiked as separation between me and the parking lot grew. I twisted the CB mic, calling out, Breaker 19, this is cab 17 on I-80 westbound. Need a tow or jump? Come in, please. A static-ridden voice answered at last, an obliging trucker named Hank, offering a jump. The world suddenly felt less isolated. I limped into the next truck stop, badly naming my rig, battered and shaken. Hank's cables roared to life, and the engine steadied. The scratches gleamed in headlight glare. What happened? He asked once the rig purred like normal. Don't know, I managed. I woke up to dead battery, scratches on the door, heard my own voice over CB. Hank's face darkened. Cab 17? Thought that rig was sold in Idaho 3 years ago. Sold? I've been driving it since then. He nodded gravely. The buyer ran off near Ely, NV. Same thing. Dead battery, scratched door, voice on CB. They found the truck empty, engine running. Guy vanished. I swallowed hard. What about him? Nobody knows. No tracks, no sign of struggle. Just gone. They recovered nothing beyond fissures on the door. A cold knot settled in my gut. Hank. What do you think it was? His eyes darted around the lot. People say the rig's cursed. Cab 17 keeps its count. Every driver who steps in, it takes something. I scoffed, though my knuckles were white. You believe that? Hank's jaw tensed. Don't have to believe. I've seen the records. 17 missing guys tied to that rig, including the original owner. My mind reeled. I'd heard rumors, ghost stories, told up at the diner at truck stops, but never believed them. Now it felt like I'd just slammed into legend at 70 Bunny. I exchanged Hank's cables, thanked him, and climbed back into cab 17. The rig's headlights picketed the darkened yard, silent witnesses. I double-checked every lock, then decided on two things. I'd never drive that rig alone past sunset again, and I'd notify my company first thing. Days later, a mechanic traced the battery drain to a parasitic draw. Wiring had been tampered with behind the dash. Whoever scratched the door had also rigged the electrical system, hoping to trap the driver. I shivered, thinking of that midnight predator who knew my schedule. Cab 17 still roams the highways, but I don't pilot her anymore. They assigned me a newer T680, electronics under RFID lock, all anomalies logged. Every so often I drive past milepost 237 on I-80, the same stretch where the Ely buyer disappeared, and I tip my hat to the empty asphalt, mindful that cab 17 might be waiting, its next victim sleeping in the sleeper berth, unaware of the passenger who comes for drivers named 17. If you ever hear your own voice over a dead CB at 3:17 a.m. or see 3 scratches on your door in the dark, run. Because cab 17 collects its dues one soul at a time, and once you know its secret, you're never really alone on the road again. Clint Donovan had been hauling timber out of the Idaho mountains for nearly 2 decades. At 48, his body bore the evidence of those years: calloused hands, a permanent squint from staring into mountain sunlight, and a back that ached on cold mornings from the countless hours spent securing massive loads of pine and spruce, destined for sawmills throughout the Northwest. Unlike the long-haul drivers who crossed state lines and slept in their cabs, Clint typically made day trips, navigating the treacherous logging roads that snaked through the Clearwater and Nez Perce National Forests. His 2010 Western Star was a familiar sight among the small community of timber workers who made their living from these remote woodlands. October was Clint's favorite month in the mountains. The tourist traffic had thinned, the summer heat had given way to crisp, clear days, and the hillsides blazed with autumn colors. But October also brought unpredictable weather. Warm afternoons could transform into snowstorms by evening, especially at higher elevations. On October 17th, Clint arrived at the Mackenzie Creek logging site shortly after dawn. A crew had been working this area for weeks, clearing a section of forest damaged by beetle infestation. Stacks of fresh-cut timber waited to be transported to the Bennett sawmill in Lewiston, about 90 miles away. "Morning, Clint," called Pete Rollins, the site foreman, as Clint climbed down from his cab. "You're our last haul today. Weather reports looking dicey for this afternoon." Clint glanced at the clear blue sky overhead. "Doesn't look like storm weather to me." Pete handed him a steaming cup of coffee from his thermos. "Fronts coming in from the west. They're saying 6 to 8 inches above 6,000 feet by nightfall. You taking Bear Creek Pass?" Clint nodded. Bear Creek Pass was the most direct route from the logging site to the highway, cutting nearly an hour off the journey compared to the longer but gentler southern route. The pass climbed to 7,200 feet through a series of tight switchbacks before descending into the valley beyond. Challenging in good conditions, potentially deadly in bad weather. "I can beat the storm," Clint said confidently. "Get loaded up and I'll be through the pass before noon." Pete looked unconvinced but didn't argue. In the world of logging, each driver made their own decisions about what risks they were willing to take. It was part of the culture, a combination of self-reliance and calculated gambles based on years of experience. The loading took longer than expected. One of the cables on the crane developed a problem, requiring temporary repairs. By the time Clint's truck was fully loaded with 30 tons of raw timber, secured with heavy chains and binders, it was already after 10 a.m. The sky to the west had begun to darken, the clear blue giving way to a wall of gray that was swallowing the distant mountain peaks. "Still think you can beat it?" Pete asked, as Clint completed his final inspection of the load. Clint studied the approaching clouds. He'd driven Bear Creek Pass in all kinds of weather. Rain, snow, fog so thick you could barely see the edge of the road. The Western Star was in good condition, recently serviced with new brake pads and fresh tires. If he pushed a little, he could still make it through the pass before the weather turned serious. "I'll be fine," Clint assured him. "This old girl's seen worse." Pete handed him a two-way radio. "Keep this on. Cell reception is spotty up there on a good day. Storm will make it worse." Clint tucked the radio into his jacket pocket, climbed into his cab, and began the journey down the rutted logging road that would eventually connect with the Forest Service road, leading to Bear Creek Pass. The first few miles were uneventful, the truck's powerful engine handling the rugged terrain with practiced ease. As he turned onto the Forest Service road, Clint noticed how quickly the weather was deteriorating. The temperature gauge on his dashboard showed a 7-degree drop in the past hour. The wind had picked up, sending the first few snowflakes swirling against his windshield. Above him, the sky had transformed from partly cloudy to an ominous slate gray. "Pete to Clint, you copy?" The radio crackled from his pocket. "I copy, Pete. What's up?" "Weather Service just upgraded to a winter storm warning, coming in faster than they thought. You might want to consider turning around, taking the southern route." Clint checked his watch. Taking the southern route now would add at least 2 hours to his journey, putting him at the sawmill after dark. And he'd already covered nearly 15 miles. Turning back would waste all that progress. "I'm pressing on," Clint decided. "Already almost to the base of the pass. I'll radio when I'm through." The road began to climb more steeply as Clint approached the pass. The scattered snowflakes had given way to a steady fall, accumulating on the shoulders of the road and dusting the massive load of timber behind him. He shifted down, the engine working harder as the grade increased. Bear Creek Pass had earned its notorious reputation honestly. The narrow, twisting road had claimed its share of vehicles over the years, mostly tourists who underestimated the difficulty or overestimated their driving abilities. But it had taken logging trucks too. 5 years earlier, a driver named Mike Holloway had lost his brakes coming down the western side. The wreckage had been visible from the road for months afterward, until the Forest Service finally brought in a helicopter to remove the twisted metal. As Clint rounded a bend that marked the beginning of the pass proper, the storm hit with surprising intensity. What had been steady snowfall suddenly became a swirling white curtain driven by wind gusts that buffeted the tall profile of the loaded truck. Visibility dropped to less than 100 feet. "Came in fast," Clint muttered to himself, turning his wipers to their highest setting and switching on his fog lights. The temperature gauge showed 28 degrees now, cold enough for the wet road surface to begin icing over. Clint slowed his speed further, navigating the first of the 7 major switchbacks that climbed toward the summit. The Western Star's engine growled steadily, the weight of the timber pressing down as the road steepened. Through the swirling snow, Clint could just make out the sheer drop-off to his right, a cliff face plunging several hundred feet to the boulder-strewn creek that gave the pass its name. By the time he reached the third switchback, the snow was falling so heavily that Clint had to lean forward, straining to see the road ahead. The curves were becoming increasingly difficult to navigate, the back end of the trailer wanting to slide outward on the slick surface. He compensated with small, careful adjustments to the steering wheel, drawing on decades of experience. Pete to Clint, "What's your position?" The radio crackled again. "About halfway up the pass," Clint reported. "Weather's pretty bad. Heavy snow, visibility down to maybe 50 feet now." "Roger that. We're getting reports of whiteout conditions at the summit. You still think you can make it through?" Clint hesitated. He was committed now. The road was too narrow to turn around, and backing down would be more dangerous than continuing forward. "No choice but to keep going. I'll take it slow." As he navigated the fourth switchback, a particularly strong gust of wind hit the truck broadside. The tall wall of timber acted like a sail, and Clint felt the right wheels briefly lose contact with the road. For a sickening moment, he thought the entire rig might tip over, plunging into the ravine below. But the Western Star's weight settled back onto all wheels, and Clint exhaled slowly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The summit of Bear Creek Pass was marked by a small turnout area where drivers could stop to check their brakes before beginning the descent. As Clint reached this area, the full fury of the storm became apparent. The wind howled around the cab, visibility reduced to mere feet as snow and ice particles flew horizontally through the air. The turnout was already covered in several inches of fresh powder, with drifts forming against the guardrail. Clint brought the truck to a stop, leaving the engine running. The wind rocked the cab, creating an eerie groaning sound as it forced its way through the countless crevices of the loaded timber. He needed to check the load before starting down the western slope. If any of the binders had loosened during the ascent, the consequences during the steeper descent could be catastrophic. Pulling on his heavy work coat and gloves, Clint stepped out into the storm. The bitter cold hit him immediately, the wind stealing his breath. He moved carefully along the side of the trailer, checking each binder in turn, tightening where necessary. The snow had packed itself into the spaces between the logs, actually helping to stabilize the load. He was checking the final binder when he heard it, a distinct cracking sound, audible even over the howling wind. Clint froze, listening intently. The sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from somewhere in the massive stack of timber. Wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. Clint knew this, but these sounds were different. Not the normal settling creaks, but sharp reports, like green wood being stressed beyond its limits. Another crack, followed by a subtle shift in the load. One of the upper logs moved slightly, disturbing the snow that had accumulated on top. Clint backed away instinctively, eyes fixed on the towering wall of timber. The radio in his pocket crackled to life. "Clint, you still there? Storm's getting worse. What's your status?" But before Clint could respond, a new sound joined the cacophony. A deep groaning, followed by the distinct snapping of metal. One of the steel binders had given way, unable to withstand the combination of the heavy load and the additional strain caused by the severe cold and wind. Clint lunged for the cab, but it was already too late. The failure of one binder transferred additional stress to the others, creating a catastrophic chain reaction. He watched in horror as the entire load began to shift, thousands of pounds of timber breaking free of their restraints and sliding sideways off the trailer. The first logs hit the ground with a thunderous impact, immediately followed by more. Clint dove beneath the truck as the avalanche of timber crashed down around him. The ground shook with each impact, the sound deafening in the confined space of the turnout. When the movement finally stopped, An eerie silence descended, broken only by the continuing howl of the wind and the occasional creak of settling wood. Clint remained frozen in his protective position, hardly daring to breathe. Gradually, he became aware of his surroundings again. He was lying in the snow beneath the truck's rear axle, snowflakes swirling around him, mixing with the sawdust that now filled the air. "Clint, do you copy? What was that noise?" The radio was still in his pocket, somehow undamaged. With shaking hands, Clint retrieved it. "I'm here. Load shifted. Lost most of the timber. Are you hurt?" Clint took mental inventory. Nothing seemed broken, though his right shoulder throbbed where he'd hit the ground. "I'm okay. Truck's probably damaged, but I can't tell from here." "Stay put," Pete's voice commanded. "I'm calling search and rescue." "No," Clint replied quickly. "No need for that. I'm not injured. Truck might still be drivable." Cautiously, Clint crawled out from his shelter. The scene that greeted him was one of chaos. Logs scattered across the turnout, some precariously balanced against the guardrail, others hanging partially over the edge of the cliff. The trailer had been wrenched at an odd angle, two of its tires completely flat from the impact of falling timber. But miraculously, the cab appeared largely undamaged. The engine was still running, white exhaust mixing with the swirling snow. Clint realized with growing dread that he was now in serious trouble. Even if the truck could still move, attempting to drive down the western slope of the pass, the steeper side, with an unstable, partially loaded trailer, would be suicidal. Staying put meant spending the night in the cab at over 7,000 feet in a worsening blizzard, hoping the fuel would last until morning. "Pete, I'm going to try to make it back down the eastern slope," Clint decided. "Trailer's damaged, but the cab seems okay. I can disconnect if necessary." "That's a negative," Pete responded immediately. "Weather service says this storm's going to get worse before it gets better. Plus, you'd be backing down those switchbacks. Too dangerous." Clint knew Pete was right, but the alternative, waiting helplessly as night fell and temperatures plummeted further, seemed even worse. He was contemplating his limited options when a new sound emerged from the storm, the low rumble of a diesel engine. At first, Clint thought he must be imagining it, but the sound grew steadily louder, approaching from the western side of the pass. Out of the swirling white emerged the silhouette of another truck, a logging rig similar to his own, moving slowly through the treacherous conditions. Clint waved his arms frantically, though he doubted he could be seen through the heavy snowfall. The approaching truck slowed and then stopped. Its door swung open, and a figure bundled in heavy winter gear stepped down. "Looks like you could use some help," a woman's voice called out. Relief flooded through Clint as the driver approached. She was in her 30s, with weathered features that marked her as an experienced logger. Her name patch read, Sarah Larson. "Load shifted," Clint explained, gesturing to the scattered timber. "Not sure I can get down." Sarah surveyed the scene with a professional eye. "No, you can't. Not safely. But I've got chains and a tow bar. We can secure what's left of your load, disconnect your trailer if necessary, and I'll guide you back down the eastern slope." For the next hour, they worked together in the worsening storm, securing loose logs and rigging Clint's truck for the perilous journey back down. By the time they finished, both were covered in snow, their fingers numb despite heavy gloves. "I've never seen another logger up here in weather like this," Clint remarked as they prepared to leave. "What brings you over the pass today?" Sarah paused before answering. "Got a call about a driver in trouble. Happened to be closest." "From who? Pete?" "Someone from dispatch," she said vaguely. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is getting down before dark." The descent was nerve-wracking, a painstaking process of navigating each switchback in reverse, with Sarah's truck leading the way. its taillights the only visible reference point in the whiteout conditions. By the time they reached the bottom of the pass, night had fallen completely, turning the storm into a disorienting black void filled with swirling white. They made it to the logging camp shortly after 9 p.m., the journey taking over 4 hours. Pete and several other workers rushed out to meet them, faces etched with concern that gave way to relief. "Thought we'd lost you up there," Pete said, clapping Clint on the shoulder. Lucky Sarah was in the area. Clint turned to thank his rescuer, but stopped short. "Wait, how did you know to call Sarah? I never mentioned needing help." Pete looked confused. "Call Sarah? I didn't call anyone. When your radio went dead after that crashing sound, I called search and rescue. They're still organizing a team to head up there tomorrow." "But she said dispatch called her," Clint insisted. Pete shook his head. "Our dispatch closed at 5, and I've been on the radio with them all afternoon. They never mentioned sending another driver." A cold that had nothing to do with the weather settled over Clint. He turned to Sarah, who stood slightly apart from the group, her expression unreadable in the dim light of the camp. "Who are you?" Clint asked quietly. "Really?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Someone who knows what it's like to be trapped on that pass." She glanced at her truck, then back at Clint. 5 years ago, Western Slope, brake failure." Clint felt the blood drain from his face. Mike Holloway's accident? But there were no survivors. "There weren't," she agreed simply. "Be careful out there, Clint. The mountains don't forgive mistakes." Before Clint could respond, Sarah turned and walked back to her truck. He watched, frozen in place, as she climbed into the cab and drove away, her taillights soon swallowed by the swirling snow. The official report listed Clint's rescue as a fortuitous encounter with another logging professional. No driver named Sarah Larson was registered with any of the timber companies operating in the area. The truck she drove, matching the description of the one Mike Holloway had been driving 5 years earlier, was never located. Clint Donovan still drives the Idaho logging roads, but he never takes Bear Creek Pass anymore, not even in perfect weather. And in October, when the first snows begin to fall on the high country, he leaves a thermos of hot coffee at the base of the pass, a small token of gratitude for a debt that can never truly be repaid. Warren Mitchell had been driving trucks for 17 years. At 43, his once black beard was peppered with gray, and years of squinting into sunrises and sunsets had deepened the lines around his eyes. Unlike many long haulers who preferred solitude, Warren enjoyed the human connections he made on the road, from diner waitresses who remembered his coffee preference to fellow drivers, sharing tips over CB radio. His current assignment: refrigerated pharmaceuticals from Nashville to northern Arizona. The tight delivery window meant driving through the night when possible, resting during peak traffic hours. Just after 2 a.m. on I-40 in western Oklahoma, Warren noticed trouble. First, a subtle fluctuation in the engine temperature gauge, then an unfamiliar vibration in the steering wheel. After years with his Freightliner Cascadia, Warren could detect the slightest change in its operation. "Something's not right with you tonight, old girl," he murmured, easing off the accelerator. The vibration intensified, joined by rattling from the engine compartment. With no vehicles behind him, Warren gradually slowed to 40 miles per hour, activated his hazard lights, and began searching for an exit. "Sayre, 3 miles," announced a green sign in his headlights. The exit ramp led to a 2-lane highway, serving as Sayre's main street. Most businesses were dark, with only street lamps and occasional gas stations breaking the darkness. Warren spotted Richardson's Truck Haven on the town's outskirts, a small independent operation with diesel, food, and lodging. Only 3 other trucks occupied the lot, all parked for the night. As Warren parked far from the other vehicles, his engine made an ominous knocking sound before shutdown. His experience told him this wasn't something he could fix with his basic tools. He'd need a professional mechanic. Inside the main building, fluorescent lighting illuminated the nearly empty space. A middle-aged woman with bottle red hair stood behind the counter reading a paperback. "Morning, driver. Coffee's fresh. Just made it 20 minutes ago," she offered with a practiced smile. "Thanks, I could use some," Warren replied. "Also wondering if you have a mechanic on call. Got some engine trouble that doesn't sound good." The woman, her name tag read Doris, grimaced sympathetically. "Our mechanic doesn't come in till 8, but we've got rooms if you need to wait it out. Quiet night. You'd have your pick." Warren checked his watch. 2:43 a.m. With minimal buffer time in his delivery schedule, he decided staying was wiser than risking a worse breakdown in a more remote location. "I'll take a room," he decided, "and that coffee. Any chance you've got something to eat too?" "Microwave sandwich is about all I can offer this time of night," Doris said, reaching for a registration card. "Kitchen opens at 6. After completing the paperwork, Doris handed Warren a key attached to a plastic fob with the number 36. Room 36, last one at the end of the building, quietest spot, away from the highway noise. The motel portion of Richardson's Truck Haven was clearly from an earlier era. Individual doors facing the parking lot, small windows with heavy curtains, and wall-mounted air conditioners beneath each window. Room 36 sat at the very end of the row, separated from its neighbor by a wider gap than between other rooms. Inside, Warren found a space that was clean but frozen in time. Wood-paneled walls, a faded floral bedspread, and a small tube television atop a laminate dresser. He set down his coffee and sandwich, then pulled out his phone to update his dispatcher. No signal, despite being near a major interstate. "Guess it'll have to wait till morning," he muttered, sitting on the bed. The room felt unexpectedly cold, despite the warm September night. Warren checked the air conditioning unit. It was off. The window was securely closed, yet the temperature kept dropping, his breath now visible with each exhale. "What the hell?" Warren whispered, rubbing his arms. That's when he noticed the radio on the nightstand, an antique wooden box with an analog dial and fabric-covered speaker, looking like something from the 1940s. As Warren examined it, the radio clicked on by itself. Static filled the room, then a voice emerged. "Ohming through Sayre. Engine trouble. Richardson's. Help at room 36. Repeat. Driver needs." The message cut out, returning to static. It sounded like a CB transmission, but the voice had a hollow quality, and this antique radio shouldn't pick up CB frequencies at all. Warren switched it off and unplugged it. The room remained unnaturally cold. He wrapped himself in the extra blanket from the closet and tried to eat his sandwich, telling himself he was too experienced to be rattled by a strange motel room or malfunctioning radio. 10 minutes later, someone knocked firmly on his door. It was 3:17 a.m., too early for the mechanic. "Who is it?" Warren called, approaching cautiously. No answer came, but the knocking repeated, more insistent. Warren looked through the peephole but saw only darkness, as if something were covering it from outside. "Hello? I can't see you out there." The knocking stopped. After a moment of silence, a male voice spoke from just outside. "Got your message on the CB. Said you needed help in room 36. Warren froze. He hadn't sent any message. He couldn't even reach his dispatcher, due to no cell service. "There's been some mistake," Warren replied. "I didn't send any message." "Radio said driver in room 36 needed urgent help," the voice insisted. "Open up, man. It's cold out here." Something about this statement disturbed Warren. It wasn't cold outside on this mild September night, yet inside room 36, he could see his breath. "I think you should go," Warren said firmly. "Have it your way," the voice replied with unnerving calm. "But I'll be seeing you down the road, Warren. Drivers like us always find each other eventually." The use of his name, which Warren had only given to Doris on the registration card, sent alarm through him. No footsteps indicated the visitor's departure. Warren called the front desk. When Doris answered, he asked if she'd sent anyone to his room. "No, honey. There's nobody here but me," she confirmed. "Want me to call the sheriff?" Warren hesitated. What would he tell them? That a stranger knocked on his door? That his room was inexplicably cold? "No, that's all right. But has anything strange ever happened in room 36 before?" A long silence followed. "Why do you ask that?" Doris finally responded, her voice tense. "Just curious. The room feels different." Doris sighed heavily. "Look, I'm not supposed to talk about it. Owner thinks it's bad for business. But since you're already in there was an incident in 1976. Driver named Howard Welch stopped here with engine trouble. Room 36 was his room." "What happened to him?" Warren asked. Story goes that he woke up in the middle of the night, used his CB to call for help. Said something was wrong with his room, that it was getting colder by the minute. Another driver responded, said he was coming to help. Howard was found the next morning. Heart attack, they said. But the room was cold. Middle of July. No AC running, but frost on the inside of the window. And they never found the driver who supposedly responded to Howard's call. Warren's eyes drifted to the radio he'd unplugged. It was on again, softly hissing static. "The radio in my room keeps turning on by itself," Warren said quietly. "What radio?" Doris asked, confused. "Our rooms don't have radios, just the TV. There's an old wooden radio here. Looks like something from the 50s. That doesn't make sense," Doris whispered. The only radio like that was Howard's personal radio. He collected antiques. It was logged in the police report, then given to his family after his death. As if responding to this revelation, the radio's static cleared, and a voice came through. "Warren Mitchell, room 36, September 19th, found you." The date struck Warren with horrifying significance. September 19th, 1976, was when a freak ice storm hit western Oklahoma, killing several truckers caught unprepared. "What was the date when Howard Welch died?" Warren asked urgently. "September 19th, 1976, Doris answered. "Today's the anniversary." The radio crackled. "Coming for you, Warren, just like I came for Howard and all the others in room 36, every September 19th. Warren lunged for the door, yanking it open. Instead of warm night air, he met a wall of frigid cold. The parking lot was covered in ice, trucks dusted with snow. His breath clouded heavily as he turned back toward room 36. A man stood in the doorway, tall, gaunt, dressed in a 1970s-style trucker's jacket. His face was blue-tinged, eyes milky white. "Told you I'd be seeing you down the road, Warren," the figure said. "We truckers have to stick together." Warren ran toward the office, slipping on ice. Behind him, footsteps crunched on frost, slow, unhurried. When Warren reached the office door, he found it locked. Through the window, he saw Doris on the phone, her expression frantic. She rushed to let him in. "It's happening again," she cried. "I've called 911, but in this weather, it could be an hour before they arrive." "What weather?" Warren demanded. "It was clear just an hour ago." Doris pointed outside, where a blizzard now raged, a localized ice storm centered precisely on Richardson's truck haven. They huddled in the office through the night as the temperature plummeted to 17 degrees. When dawn came, the storm dissipated as suddenly as it had appeared. Authorities documented the freak weather event, but found no explanation. Room 36 showed no signs of disturbance and contained no antique radio. Warren's truck, when examined by the mechanic, showed no evidence of the engine trouble that had stranded him. Before leaving, Warren asked Doris one final question. "Has anyone else ever survived Room 36 on September 19th? "Not that I know of," she replied. "Most years, the room stands empty that night. Last driver who stayed there on the 19th was in 2018. Found him next morning. Heart attack, just like Howard." Warren completed his delivery to Arizona, then changed his routes to avoid western Oklahoma entirely. He never again stopped at independent motels. But every year on September 19th, regardless of where he is, his truck's CB radio activates on its own, broadcasting, "Driver in trouble, Room 36, coming to help." And each time, Warren drives through the night without stopping, knowing that at Richardson's Truck Haven, something waits for another driver to take the last room at the end of the building. Derek Hansen, 39, had driven the I-95 corridor for 14 years, mastering every rhythm of the East Coast's main artery. He preferred northern runs despite winter challenges, regularly requesting the Boston to Bangor route, hauling paper products to main distribution centers. Mid-November found Derek loading commercial paper products bound for Bangor. The forecast predicted New England's first significant snowfall, but his well-maintained Kenworth T680 had new snow tires and chains, if needed. Departing Boston at 6:15 a.m., Derek hoped to reach central Maine by early afternoon, ahead of the heavier snowfall. Light flurries occasionally speckled his windshield as he drove through Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. Just north of Portland, Derek noticed a maroon Freightliner with silver striping maintaining consistent distance behind him. Though not unusual to have company on I-95, something about this specific truck triggered an elusive memory. At Augusta, Derek stopped for fuel and coffee. The maroon Freightliner also pulled in, an older model with faded paint, hauling construction equipment under tarps. The driver remained inside while Derek went for coffee, still trying to place why the truck seemed familiar. Snow intensified approaching Waterville. Radio reports warned conditions were deteriorating faster than predicted, and traffic had thinned as travelers heeded advisories to postpone trips. Through his working wipers, Derek spotted the maroon Freightliner ahead, now moving erratically, slowing dramatically, then accelerating. Concerned, Derek grabbed his CB radio. "Northbound on I-95 around mile marker 127. Anybody copy? Got a maroon Freightliner flatbed moving erratically. Just giving folks a heads up." After static, a voice responded. "This is southbound passing Waterville. We've got almost whiteout conditions here. DOT's closing the highway at Newport Interchange. You might want to get off soon." "Copy that," Derek replied. "Any other northbound traffic ahead of me?" "Negative. You're the only truck I've seen northbound in the last 20 minutes. Derek frowned. "I've got a maroon Freightliner about a quarter mile ahead of me. No traffic ahead of you from my position. Road's empty northbound except for your lights." A cold sensation settled in Derek's stomach as he watched the truck's taillights glowing through thickening snow. Then the memory surfaced. 7 years earlier, during another November storm, he'd witnessed the aftermath of a pileup from the southbound lanes. A maroon Freightliner with silver striping had been involved. Its cab crushed. The driver killed instantly. Derek had met that driver, Cal Mercer, at a truck stop just hours before. That couldn't be the same truck, yet the resemblance was uncanny. Suddenly, Derek's headlights revealed something impossible: an unmarked exit ramp where no exit should exist. The Freightliner's brake lights flashed as it turned onto this mysterious ramp. Derek had driven this stretch hundreds of times. There was no exit here. Yet there it was, paved and curving into the forest, bearing the truck's fresh tracks. He continued straight, wondering if it was an emergency access road he'd somehow never noticed, or if the storm was causing disorientation. 5 miles further, flashing lights appeared ahead. A Maine State Police cruiser blocked the highway, an officer directing traffic. Derek stopped as the trooper approached. "Highway's closed ahead," the officer shouted over the wind. "Storm intensified faster than expected. We're directing all traffic to exit." "Is there a service road about 5 miles back?" Derek asked. "I saw another truck turn off there." The officer looked puzzled. "No unauthorized exits in this section, just the numbered interchanges." "What mile marker?" "Around 132, unmarked paved road. A maroon Freightliner took it." The trooper's expression changed to concern. He stepped away to speak into his radio, then returned. "Mr. Hansen, I need you to pull over and come with me to my vehicle." Derek was startled by the use of his name. "Is there a problem?" "Not with you, but it's important we talk." Inside the patrol car, Sergeant Paul Descoteau asked Derek to describe exactly what he'd seen. As Derek spoke, the sergeant's expression grew increasingly grave. "Are you familiar with a trucking accident here in November 2016? He asked. Derek nodded. "The pileup during a snowstorm. One vehicle was a maroon Freightliner like the one I saw today. That truck was driven by Calvin Mercer. He died on impact." "I remember," Derek said. "I met him at a truck stop in Bangor that day." The sergeant showed Derek a photograph. "Is this the truck you saw today?" The image showed the exact same truck Derek had been following. "That's it," Derek confirmed. "Exactly the same, just more weathered." "This photo was taken the day of Mercer's accident," the sergeant said quietly. "In the 7 years since that pileup, we've received 37 separate reports describing encounters identical to yours. Always during the first significant snowstorm. Always in the same stretch. Always Mercer's truck, turning onto an exit that doesn't exist." "What are you saying?" "The coordinates where drivers report seeing this phantom exit correspond exactly to where Mercer's GPS indicated he left the main highway. But here's what wasn't reported publicly. Mercer's truck wasn't part of the main collision. It was found 200 yards into the forest, at the bottom of an embankment. The evidence suggested he turned sharply off the highway before the pileup occurred. There is no road there, just forest. Yet his truck left the highway at a point that would correspond to a standard exit ramp curve. So these people, including me, are seeing. Every driver who reported following that truck describes the same sequence. They see the exit, take it, and find themselves on a road leading deeper into the forest before abruptly ending at a drop-off, precisely where Mercer's truck went over. Did they crash?" "Everyone managed to stop in time," Descoteau assured him. "But many reported feeling an inexplicable urge to keep driving, despite seeing the danger ahead." "Why are you telling me this?" Derek asked. "Because you're the first person in 7 years who saw the exit, but didn't take it. I'm trying to understand why." "I don't know," Derek admitted. "Something felt wrong, and I remembered meeting Cal before his accident." After arranging overnight accommodations, Derek asked, "Does Mercer have any connection to this specific area?" Descoteau hesitated. Calvin's wife told investigators something disturbing. The night before the accident, Cal called her about picking up a hitchhiker, an older man who kept insisting they needed to find Lane 7. When Cal explained I-95 only had 2 lanes each direction, the man became agitated, saying, "Northbound Lane 7 is only visible in the snow." Did they identify this hitchhiker? No evidence of a passenger was found. But when rescue workers found the truck, the path it carved through the forest was exactly 7 meters wide. "As if he had found Lane 7, Derek murmured. Before leaving, Derek asked why the sergeant had known his name. Descoteau showed Derek another photograph, this one showing Derek and Calvin Mercer talking beside a fuel pump the day of the accident. What you may not remember is what witnesses overheard. Cal told you about his strange hitchhiker and the Lane 7 story. You laughed it off and said, "If you find that Lane 7, save me a spot. I'll be making the same run next week." For 7 years, every driver who reported seeing Mercer's truck had one thing in common. None knew him personally. None except you. That's why I was waiting. You were always going to be the next one who saw the exit. The only question was whether you would take it. Derek completed his delivery the next day and immediately requested a transfer to any route that wouldn't take him through central Maine. For 5 years, he avoided New England during winter. Then, in November 2028, a staffing shortage forced Derek back onto I-95 during the season's first snowstorm. As he approached mile marker 132, the maroon Freightliner appeared in his headlights. This time, when it turned onto the unmarked exit, Derek found his hands turning the wheel to follow, as if guided by an invisible force. The service road curved through snow-covered forest. Derek knew he should stop, knew the drop-off was coming, yet felt strangely calm. Through his windshield, he could now see not just one truck, but a line of identical maroon Freightliners, forming a procession along a much wider road. Northbound Lane 7 stretched before him, visible only in the snow, beckoning him to take his reserved spot in line. Victor Reeves preferred numbers to people. At 52, he had spent 3 decades hauling freight across America, accumulating over 3.5 million miles. His precision was legendary among dispatchers. If Victor said he'd arrive at 2:17 p.m., you could set your watch by his Peterbilt's arrival. Unlike truckers who romanticized their profession, Victor approached driving as a mathematical exercise. Average speed multiplied by time, minus predictable delays, equaled estimated arrival. His routes were calculated for maximum efficiency, rest periods scheduled to the minute while minimizing downtime. This methodical approach had earned him an impeccable safety record and financial security. He owned his truck outright, a meticulously maintained 2019 Peterbilt 579 with a 76-inch sleeper cab equipped with every comfort a solitary man might need. In late March, Victor accepted a load of industrial refrigeration components bound from Chicago to Boise, Idaho. The 1,500-mile journey would cross Illinois and Iowa's plains, Nebraska's endless horizons, Wyoming's wind-carved landscapes, and finally, Idaho's varied terrain. He departed Chicago at 4:30 a.m., navigating pre-dawn streets before merging onto I-88 westbound. The forecast promised clear conditions, unusual good fortune for early spring, when weather could transform rapidly, particularly in Wyoming's mountain passes. Victor settled into highway rhythm, mind occupied with familiar calculations. Average speed, 63 mph. Fuel stops, 3. Required rest periods, 2. Estimated arrival, 7:45 p.m. The following day, accounting for time zone change. The Illinois and Iowa portions passed uneventfully. Victor maintained a consistent pace, stopping only when his precisely calculated fuel consumption required it. As he crossed into Nebraska on I-80, the terrain flattened further, the highway stretching toward the horizon in an almost perfect line. This section was notorious for inducing highway hypnosis, miles of unchanging scenery under an enormous sky. Victor had developed strategies to combat this, rotating through mathematics podcasts and box-structured compositions, which mirrored his appreciation for order. Near Kearney, Nebraska, about 350 miles into his journey, Victor noticed something unusual. His rarely used CB radio began emitting intermittent static bursts with a pattern almost like Morse code. Victor adjusted the squelch dial, which typically filtered out weaker signals, but the rhythmic static continued. He cycled through all 40 channels with the same result before turning the radio off completely. The static stopped, and Victor returned his attention to the road. But less than a minute later, without being touched, the CB switched itself back on, emitting the same patterned static. Victor frowned. Electrical malfunctions were rare in his meticulously maintained truck, but not impossible. He simply unplugged the CB unit from its power source. By late afternoon, Victor had entered Wyoming, the landscape gradually transforming from flatlands to rolling hills. He stopped at a truck plaza east of Cheyenne for fuel, food, and his first mandated rest period. After completing his logbook entries, Victor tried calling his sister in Oregon, their monthly check-in. But his cell showed no service, despite the truck stop's location near a major interstate junction where coverage was typically reliable. "Been that way all day," the cashier informed him when Victor inquired. "Some kind of weird interference. Landlines are working, though." Deciding his call could wait, Victor returned to his truck. As he climbed into the cab, he noticed the CB radio was back in its cradle, reconnected to power. This was impossible. He had specifically unplugged it and stored it beneath his bunk. Before processing this discrepancy, the radio crackled to life, the static pattern now more pronounced. Within that static, almost imperceptible at first, was a voice, distant and distorted, but definitely human. "Help. Wyoming border. Mile marker. Trapped." Victor stared at the radio, searching for a rational explanation. He examined his truck for signs of intrusion, but found none. The doors had been locked, security system engaged. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing. He returned to the radio, which continued its pattern of static with occasional voice fragments. Something about the voice, its tone of desperation, compelled him to listen more carefully. After adjusting the controls, the voice became slightly more distinct. "Anyone copy? Accident at mile marker 401. Wyoming. Need immediate. Running out of..." Mile marker 401 on I-80 would be somewhere west of Cheyenne, part of Victor's upcoming route. Despite his schedule adherence, Victor decided to depart earlier than planned. If someone needed help, authorities should be notified. He explained what he'd heard to the attendant and asked to use the landline to contact Highway Patrol. "You say mile marker 401? The attendant's expression shifted from boredom to unease. "Might want to rethink your route. That stretch has a bad history. Real bad." "What kind of history?" Victor asked. "Started 9 years back. Major pileup during a sudden snowstorm. 7 vehicles, 5 fatalities, including a family with 2 kids. Since then, that stretch between markers 400 and 405 has had an accident rate nearly triple the state average." "I appreciate the warning," Victor replied, "but I need to maintain my schedule. The forecast indicates clear conditions." Victor called Wyoming Highway Patrol, explained the situation, and provided the mile marker. The dispatcher noted no accidents had been reported there, but would send a patrol car to check. As Victor pulled back onto I-80, he found himself unusually alert, the attendant's warning lingering in his thoughts. Something about the situation felt wrong, a disruption in the orderly pattern of his carefully structured world. The Wyoming landscape grew more dramatic, traffic sparse, mostly commercial vehicles making night runs. As Victor approached mile marker 390, the CB burst to life again. This time, the voice was clearer. "Westbound traffic. Accident ahead. Mile 401. Multiple vehicles. Need assistance. The voice was female with an unusual cadence, delivering information emotionlessly, almost clinically. At mile marker 395, Victor noticed the temperature had dropped significantly, 10 degrees in 15 minutes. The previously clear sky now showed low clouds obscuring the horizon. The radio crackled again. Mile marker 401, multiple casualties, requires immediate. This transmission contained odd background sounds like emergency sirens, but distorted, stretched out as if playing at the wrong speed. At mile marker 398, Victor spotted hazard lights ahead. He reduced speed and switched to high beams, revealing a single passenger vehicle on the shoulder, its front end crumpled against the guardrail. Victor slowed further, scanning for occupants or other vehicles. The mid-2000s sedan showed significant front-end damage, but oddly, no debris on the road, no broken glass, no dislodged bumper pieces, no fluid leaks. As Victor stopped about 50 feet behind the damaged vehicle, the CB erupted with painfully loud static. Then the voice returned, now sounding as if speaking directly into the microphone. "Do not stop. Continue moving. Do not exit your vehicle." Victor put the truck back in gear, but before accelerating, he noticed movement at the damaged car. A figure emerged from the driver's side, a woman in light-colored clothing, possibly scrubs, moving with an odd gliding gait toward his truck. The radio hissed, "Leave now. Pattern repeating. Mile marker 401. Victor hesitated, torn between helping a stranded motorist and the increasingly strange circumstances. Then the CB erupted with a new voice, male, authoritative. "This is Wyoming Highway Patrol. All vehicles near mile marker 400. Do not stop for any reason. Proceed with caution. Repeat, do not stop." Victor's headlights suddenly dimmed, fluctuating before returning to normal brightness. In that momentary darkness, the approaching figure seemed to change. For just an instant, Victor saw something his rational mind struggled to process. He released the brake and accelerated, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The CB continued transmitting fragmented words. Pat turn repeating. 9 years. Family. Mile 401. At mile marker 401, exactly, Victor's truck passed through what felt like a curtain of cold air. The temperature gauge dropped precipitously, displaying an impossible -20 degrees. Frost formed on his windshield, despite the heater running at maximum. Through this growing ice layer, Victor saw multiple vehicles scattered across both westbound lanes. A jackknifed semi blocking the right lane. Passenger cars collided with the trailer. Another truck precariously balanced on the shoulder slope. Shadowy figures moved between vehicles, their movements strangely synchronized. No actual emergency vehicles were present, despite the lights and siren sounds now emanating from Victor's radio. For the first time in his driving career, Victor violated his safety protocols. Instead of slowing, he accelerated, guiding his truck through a narrow gap in the chaos. As he passed through, the figures turned in unison to track his movement. Dozens of pale faces with expressions Victor refused to examine closely. His truck cleared the scene, and suddenly the road was empty, the night clear, stars visible again. The temperature returned to normal, frost receding from his windshield. The CB fell silent. Victor maintained his increased speed for several miles before pulling into a rest area near Rawlins, hands shaking. After processing what he'd witnessed, Victor accessed his dashcam footage. The video showed the highway exactly as he remembered, with one critical difference. There was no accident scene at mile marker 401, just empty highway under clear skies. The only anomaly was a brief moment of interference precisely at mile marker 401, where the image distorted for approximately 3 seconds. With his phone now showing service, Victor called Wyoming Highway Patrol and asked about accident history at mile marker 401. The supervisor confirmed a catastrophic multi-vehicle accident 9 years earlier at that exact location, with 5 fatalities, including a nurse who had stopped to render aid. The weird thing, the supervisor added, is we get calls about accidents at that exact spot regularly. When units respond, they never find anything. Started happening about a year after the original accident, always between midnight and 4 a.m. on clear nights. Has anyone reported seeing people there? Victor asked carefully. After a pause, drivers report seeing a woman in white, the nurse who died trying to help, flagging them down. Some report seeing the entire accident playing out exactly as it happened 9 years ago. We've had 3 fatalities in that area since, all drivers who had stopped at mile marker 401 shortly before losing control. Victor completed his journey to Boise without further incident, arriving exactly on schedule. But he made one permanent change to his routing algorithm, programming his GPS to alert him whenever a potential route would take him near mile marker 401 on I-80 in Wyoming. Some patterns, he had learned, were better left unexamined. Some calculations included variables beyond the mathematical, and sometimes the shortest distance between 2 points wasn't measured in miles alone. Wyoming Highway Patrol records show a 73% decrease in accident reports near mile marker 4001 in the years following Victor's experience, beginning precisely on the night a tractor-trailer's dash cam recorded 3 seconds of unexplained interference at exactly that location. Mason Coulter hadn't dreamed in years. After 19 years hauling freight, his sleep was a black void, providing physical rest, but no mental reprieve. At 45, he'd accepted this as another occupational hazard. His body ran on truck time, drive 11 hours, rest 10, repeat across time zones with mechanical precision. His current assignment, automotive components, from Detroit to Arizona. Mid-July heat made his Kenworth's cab feel like an oven, despite maximum air conditioning. Mason knew this route well. Every truck stop, reliable diner, and trooper hiding spot. What he couldn't predict was the radiator problem forcing him to exit near Terre Haute at sunset. The temperature gauge had been climbing for 20 miles before entering the red zone. Mason followed signs to Foster's Truck Repair, a small operation set back from the main road. Tom Foster, a heavy-set man in oil-stained coveralls, approached. "Radiator trouble? You're the third one today. This heat's brutal on cooling systems." "Timeline?" Tom grimaced. "Got 2 ahead of you, and my second mechanic called in sick. Best case, I start on yours tomorrow morning." "Any alternative options nearby?" "Nothing open now, but there's a motel down the road. Might as well get some real rest instead of sleeping in your cab." Mason arranged to leave his truck and transferred his overnight bag to Tom's pickup. The Wayside Motel appeared as they crested a hill, a single-story structure from the late 1960s with a buzzing neon sign. An elderly woman named Martha processed Mason's credit card, explaining the motel was nearly empty. "Not much call for stops out here unless something's gone wrong," Martha observed. "Truck trouble, radiator issues at Foster's." Martha handed Mason a key attached to a plastic fob with the number 17. "Put you on the end, away from the highway noise." Room 17 was basic but clean. After a lukewarm shower, Mason stretched on the bed and switched on the television. That's when he noticed the silence. Not just the TV's muted sound, but complete absence of ambient noise. No air conditioning hum, no distant highway, no insects outside. The silence felt dense, almost pressurized. He moved to the window and peered through the curtains. In the dim parking lot, Mason watched a tall, thin man, moving with an odd, shambling gait toward a camping trailer. The man tested the trailer's door, peered into its windows, then returned to his room. His movements seemed mechanical, almost like a marionette, controlled by unseen strings. Mason returned to bed and set his alarm for 6:30 a.m. Sleep came quickly, but proved fitful, filled with half-formed dreams of driving endless unmarked highways. Strange figures stood at regular intervals along the shoulder, watching his passage with eyes that reflected light like animals. He jolted awake at 2:17 a.m. The silence had changed. It now felt expectant, as if the air itself were listening. A soft scratching sound came from the door, fingernails dragging across the painted surface with a deliberate pattern. 3 slow scrapes, pause, 3 more. "Who's there?" Mason called out. The scratching stopped immediately. Complete silence. Mason reached for his phone but found no service. The room phone was dead. Deciding direct confrontation was preferable to uncertainty, Mason moved toward the door and looked through the peephole, but saw only darkness. The scratching resumed, more insistent. "I'm calling the police," Mason bluffed. A voice responded, soft, barely above a whisper. "We're sleeping, Mason. All of us. You need to sleep too." The voice was male with an odd, flat affect. More disturbing was the use of his name. "Who are you?" "A fellow traveler. Let me in. I can help you sleep. Real sleep. Not the empty kind you're used to." Mason backed away and retrieved a metal towel rod from the bathroom. "I don't need help sleeping," Mason said firmly. "Go away." "There's no one to call, Mason. Martha's been sleeping for years. We all have. Except you. You keep moving. Keep driving. It's time to stop." The doorknob began turning slowly, the deadbolt the only barrier. Then the deadbolt mechanism clicked, the sound impossibly loud. The door, however, remained closed. "Last chance, Mason," the voice whispered, now seeming to come from both outside and inside the room. "Let me help you sleep. The real kind. The kind with dreams. Don't you miss dreaming?" The truth was, Mason did miss dreaming. The void his sleep had become had slowly eroded something essential in him. "What are you talking about?" "We dream for those who can't. Drivers like you, always moving, never truly resting. We dream your dreams for you, but we need you to stop." The door began opening despite the deadbolt. Through the widening gap, Mason saw the thin man from earlier. His features seemed wrong, too smooth, too symmetrical, like a mannequin. His eyes reflected light unnaturally. "Who are you?" Mason demanded again. "Edward Kramer, Indianapolis to Phoenix route, 32 years on the road. Then one night, I stopped here, started dreaming again, never left." "That would have been, what, the 1990s? 1984, Edward corrected. "June 17th, radiator issues." That was impossible. The man didn't look a day over 50. "You're lying," Edward smiled. "Time moves differently when you're dreaming, Mason. I've been sleeping for what feels like days, but has been decades. We're all here, all the drivers who stopped. We dream for those who can't." Additional figures appeared behind Edward, men and women with the same unnatural smoothness, the same reflective eyes, all moving with that strange, shambling gait. "Martha's been sleeping since 1972, Edward continued. "Tom Foster since 1998. We maintain this place for drivers like you, the ones who need to stop." Mason reached the bathroom window and tested it. "I've got a delivery to make." Edward's smile widened. "There is no delivery, Mason. There never was. It's just the dream of movement. We've been calling you here for years. Every breakdown, every detour, all attempts to bring you to us." Mason smashed the window with the towel rod, and cleared the frame of remaining shards. The figures didn't rush forward as expected. Instead, they watched with clinical interest. "You can't outrun sleep forever, Mason," Edward said softly. "Eventually, everyone stops. Everyone dreams." Mason hoisted himself through the window and ran toward the main road. The truck service center appeared ahead. Mason reached the parking lot and found his Kenworth where he'd left it. Light shone from the small office. Inside, Mason found his keys, supposedly in Tom Foster's possession overnight, beside a completed invoice. Radiator flush and replacement, no charge. A handwritten note was attached. "Fixed while you slept. Safe travels. Don't stop again until Phoenix. TF." Mason glanced at his watch. 3:42 a.m. He'd been at the motel less than 6 hours, nowhere near enough time for a complete radiator replacement. Despite the impossibility, Mason collected his keys, inspected his truck, and found everything in proper working order. He started the engine and pulled out. For the next several hundred miles, Mason violated his own protocols regarding mandated rest periods, driving straight through to St. Louis, then continuing west. It wasn't until Oklahoma City, nearly 700 miles from Terre Haute, that exhaustion forced him to stop. Despite overwhelming fatigue, Mason fought against sleep, consuming coffee and energy drinks. But eventually, biology won out. Mason secured his truck and surrendered to unconsciousness. And for the first time in years, Mason dreamed, vivid, complex narratives that felt more real than waking life. When he finally woke, his phone's search history revealed something troubling. Mason had apparently researched both Foster's truck repair and the Wayside Motel, though he had no memory of doing so. According to search results, neither business existed. The coordinates where he had spent that strange night showed nothing but an abandoned gas station closed since the late 1960s. In the months that followed, Mason's sleep patterns changed dramatically. He began dreaming regularly, always of roads and journeys. Some nights, he'd wake with the certainty that Edward Kramer had been sitting in his passenger seat, explaining patiently that everyone stops eventually. Everyone dreams. Mason still drives long-haul routes, but no longer takes unplanned detours. No longer exits for mechanical issues except at major, crowded service centers. And he never stays at independent motels in small towns where the silence feels too complete, where fellow travelers might be waiting to help him sleep, the real kind of sleep, the kind with dreams. Because Mason understands now what happens on the edge of slumber, in that liminal space between movement and rest. And he knows that somewhere in Indiana, Edward Kramer and the others are still waiting, still dreaming, still calling to drivers who push themselves too hard, still maintaining their way station for those who need to finally, truly stop. Graham Wheeler had driven the Dallas to El Paso route via I-20 and I-10 every third week for 16 years. At 49, his hands bore the calluses and sunspots of a lifetime gripping a steering wheel. His eyes permanently creased from squinting into the relentless Texas sun. Unlike many truckers who complained about West Texas's monotony, Graham found comfort in its vast emptiness. The endless horizons, isolated mesas, and dramatic cloud formations were constants in his life of perpetual movement. Early October found Graham departing Dallas, with construction materials bound for El Paso. His Peterbilt 579 hummed steadily as he settled into the familiar interstate rhythm. He'd made this run so many times that his body operated on precise internal schedule. He knew exactly where to fuel, which rest areas had clean facilities, and which stretches required vigilance for wildlife or highway patrol. The first day passed uneventfully. Graham reached his usual stop in Midland as the sun set, casting long shadows across the truck plaza. After showering and eating at the diner, he completed his logbook and retired to his sleeper cab. He awoke before dawn and was back on the road by 5:30 a.m., headlights cutting through darkness as I-20 stretched westward. Graham clicked on his CB radio to monitor reports of road hazards or speed traps. As the sun crested the horizon, Graham noticed something unusual in his mirror. A dark SUV maintaining consistent distance behind him, neither passing nor falling back, despite his speed fluctuations. Such behavior wasn't unheard of. Some civilian drivers found comfort following a professional trucker through unfamiliar territory. But something about this vehicle raised Graham's instinctual caution, perhaps its unwavering position, or windows tinted darker than legally permitted in Texas. After 20 minutes with no change, Graham tested his follower. He reduced his speed from 65 to 55 km/h, watching as the SUV similarly decelerated, maintaining exact same distance. When Graham returned to previous speed, the SUV matched precisely. Westbound on I-20 near Monahans, anybody else notice a dark SUV shadowing trucks this morning? Graham asked over CB. A voice responded. Affirmative, Wheeler. Been tracking a black Suburban for about 30 miles before it peeled off behind you. Driving strange, keeping perfect distance, never varies. Gave me the creeps. This confirmation did nothing to ease Graham's discomfort. As he approached the junction where I-20 met I-10, he decided on a simple test. Instead of continuing his usual route, he signaled and exited onto a state highway that would eventually reconnect with I-10 further west. The SUV followed. Graham's unease deepened. This was deliberate tracking. He reached for his cell phone to call dispatch, finding no service. Not unusual in remote West Texas, but inconvenient at this moment. The state highway cut through flat desert terrain, punctuated by occasional oil pump jacks. Graham increased speed slightly, watching as the SUV maintained position with mechanical precision. After 10 miles, Graham spotted a roadside rest area, little more than a gravel turnout, with a covered picnic table and rudimentary restroom. On impulse, he pulled in, positioning his truck to watch the SUV's movements. To his surprise, the SUV continued past without slowing. Graham watched its taillights recede and disappear around a bend. Perhaps he'd overreacted. The SUV could have been law enforcement conducting surveillance, or a trainee learning to maintain proper following distance. After using the facilities and refilling his coffee, Graham prepared to continue. As he completed his pre-departure inspection, a glint of metal caught his attention beneath the trailer. Graham crouched down, peering between the rear wheels. Something had been attached to the undercarriage, a small metallic device approximately the size of a paperback book, with no identifying markings. Its positioning indicated intentional concealment, a tracking device. Graham's first instinct was to remove it immediately, but caution stayed his hand. Removing it might alert whoever had placed it, potentially escalating the situation. Instead, Graham completed his inspection as if he'd noticed nothing unusual, then returned to the highway. Back on I-10, approximately 2 hours from El Paso, Graham kept watch for the SUV's return, while his mind raced with possibilities. Was he being tracked because of his cargo? The construction materials weren't particularly valuable. Was it personal? Graham couldn't think of anyone with motive to follow him specifically. His CB radio crackled. Eastbound to westbound. Be advised of unusual activity at the Border Patrol checkpoint, 20 miles east of Sierra Blanca. They're pulling over every commercial vehicle for secondary inspection, searching for something specific. A new voice confirmed. This is westbound, passing the checkpoint now. They're inspecting everything with wheels and a DOT number. Dogs, scanning equipment, the works. Plan for at least an hour delay. The checkpoint was approximately 50 miles ahead. If the tracker was related to whatever Border Patrol was searching for, Graham was driving into a potentially problematic situation. Another voice broke through. Heads up westbound. Black Suburban moving fast on the shoulder, passing traffic about 10 miles east of the checkpoint. Looks official, but no markings. The timing was too coincidental. Making a quick decision, Graham took the next exit onto a smaller state highway that would bypass the checkpoint entirely. After 20 minutes on this poorly maintained road, Graham spotted a turnoff leading to an abandoned gas station. He guided his truck behind the building, positioning it out of sight from the highway, and cut the engine. As he reached for his cell phone, finding a single bar of service, movement in his mirror caught his attention. A vehicle had turned off the highway, the black Suburban. Graham ended his call before it connected, watching as the SUV circled the property before stopping in front of the building, blocking his most direct exit. Minutes passed in tense silence. Before Graham could decide his next move, the driver emerged, a man in his 30s, wearing casual clothes, with no identifying insignia. He scanned the property methodically, then removed a small electronic device from his pocket, consulting it briefly before turning toward Graham's hidden truck. The man began walking toward the back of the building, movements purposeful. Graham realized the device was likely a receiver for the tracker. The man knew exactly where Graham was hidden. Graham started his engine, shifted into gear, and accelerated around the opposite side of the building. The truck lurched over uneven ground as Graham steered toward a gap in the dilapidated fencing. In his mirror, Graham saw the man sprint back toward the Suburban, but the truck's head start proved sufficient. By the time the SUV's engine roared to life, Graham had reached the state highway and was accelerating toward its junction with a county road he knew would eventually lead back to I-10 beyond the checkpoint. For the next 40 minutes, Graham drove with focused intensity, taking turns deeper into the network of secondary roads. The Suburban appeared occasionally in his mirrors, sometimes closing distance before Graham's knowledge of the area allowed him to increase the gap. What Graham didn't anticipate was the roadblock that suddenly appeared as he rounded a bend. Two unmarked SUVs positioned across both lanes, with armed individuals in tactical gear, but no obvious law enforcement insignia, standing beside them. Graham slowed, but didn't stop. His instincts warning that their lack of proper identification made compliance dangerous. He veered sharply onto a dirt track, barely wide enough for his truck. After several miles on this rough path, Graham spotted a cluster of buildings in the distance, a small ranch, the first sign of legitimate human presence since leaving the highway. He directed his truck toward it, hoping to find assistance or at least witnesses. As he approached, Graham could see it was indeed a working ranch, with several vehicles parked near a main house. He pulled into the property's entrance and honked repeatedly. An older man emerged, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Before Graham could explain, the black Suburban appeared on the dirt track, approaching rapidly. The rancher, alarmed by the situation, withdrew a rifle from a nearby vehicle. The Suburban skidded to a stop at the sight of the armed rancher. After a tense standoff, the Suburban reversed and sped away back down the dirt track. 3 days later, after Graham had reported the incident to his company's security department and local law enforcement, he learned the explanation. The tracker was part of an elaborate cargo theft operation, targeting truckers along the I-10 corridor. The thieves identified valuable cargo through insider information, attached tracking devices to selected trucks, then intercepted vehicles at remote locations using tactics designed to make drivers believe they were dealing with law enforcement. Several drivers had been robbed at fake checkpoints, similar to the one Graham encountered. What saved Graham was a simple scheduling error. The thieves had confused his truck with another carrying high-value electronics that had departed Dallas the same day. Despite this resolution, Graham found himself unable to return to his regular route. The experience had fundamentally altered his relationship with the open road, transforming what had once been a comforting solitude into an unpredictable vulnerability. 6 months later, Graham transferred to a regional position that allowed him to return home each night. He still drives, but never alone, and never along that particular stretch of West Texas highway, where he discovered that the most dangerous vanishing point wasn't on the distant horizon, but in the space between legitimate authority and its convincing counterfeit, the twilight zone where a single wrong turn could make a man and his 16 years of experience disappear without a trace. Timothy Garland had spent 18 years behind the wheel of commercial trucks. At 43, his once dark hair had begun retreating, exposing his weathered forehead, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from countless hours squinting into sunrises and sunsets. Unlike many drivers who preferred predictable interstate corridors with frequent truck stops and reliable cell service, Tim specialized in deliveries to remote locations, requiring narrow mountain roads and isolated stretches where help could be hours away if something went wrong. This expertise led Tim to accept delivering sensitive geological monitoring equipment to a research station in New Hampshire's White Mountains. The early October timing, when mountain weather could shift from pleasant autumn to dangerous winter without warning, meant many drivers had declined the job. Tim departed from outside Boston at dawn, his Peterbilt rumbling contentedly through gradually thinning morning traffic. The forecast promised clear conditions with temperatures dropping after sunset, nothing concerning for a driver of Tim's experience. By mid-afternoon, Tim turned onto the Forest Service Road, leading to the station. Pavement quickly gave way to packed gravel, then to a rougher surface testing his truck's suspension. Dense forest created a tunnel of pine and birch that occasionally opened to reveal spectacular vistas of surrounding mountains, painted in brilliant autumn colors. The road narrowed as it climbed, forcing Tim to navigate carefully around tight bends where the shoulders sometimes crumbled into steep drop-offs. Something about this particular route triggered unease, perhaps the unusual silence or shadows that seemed to deepen unnaturally despite clear afternoon sun. About 12 miles up the mountain, Tim encountered an unexpected sight. A small white sedan parked at a tight curve, hazard lights blinking weakly. No driver was visible. The road was too narrow for his semi to pass safely without confirming the sedan was truly unoccupied. After setting his brakes, Tim grabbed his flashlight and exited the cab. The temperature felt considerably colder than minutes earlier. He approached the sedan cautiously, calling out to announce his presence. "Hello? Anyone there? Need help with your car?" No response came. Tim circled the vehicle, noting it had no wheel chocks despite being parked on a significant incline. The windows were fogged from inside. As Tim approached the driver's side window, he noticed a small handprint pressed against the inside glass, as if a child had tried to reach out. Tim's unease deepened into concern. "Anyone in there? Are you okay?" He called more urgently, tapping on the window. The distinct sound of movement came from inside, a shuffling, then silence. Tim tried the door handle, finding it unlocked. He pulled it open, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim interior. The sedan was empty. Tim stood confused, certain he had heard movement and seen the handprint moments before. He inspected the entire vehicle, but found nothing except a child's drawing on the passenger seat, showing a stick figure family beside what might have been the research station. The drawing was signed, Emma, age 6. Tim photographed the drawing before carefully returning it. After deliberation, he decided to proceed to the research station, 8 miles further up. He would alert the staff about the abandoned vehicle and evidence of a child potentially in the area. As Tim pulled away, he glanced in his mirror for one final look and felt his heart stutter. A small figure in a red jacket stood beside the sedan, watching his departure. Tim immediately braked and jumped from the cab, jogging back toward the sedan. The child, a girl with blonde hair in 2 uneven braids, remained motionless, watching his approach with unusual gravity for one so young. "Hey there," Tim called, slowing his pace. "Are you Emma? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't answer, her gaze somehow unfocused, as if looking through him rather than at him. "Are you lost?" Tim tried again, crouching to her eye level. "I can help you find your mom and dad." The girl finally spoke, her voice eerily clear in the silent forest. "They're at the top. They told me to wait in the car, but I got cold." "The research station? Your parents work there?" "They went to fix the machines," she replied. "The machines that listen to the mountain." Tim felt relief. The child's parents must be station staff, and she had been left in the car temporarily. Still, leaving a child alone in such an isolated location seemed extraordinarily irresponsible. "How about I give you a ride up to where your parents are?" Tim offered. "It's getting colder, and it'll be dark soon." The girl considered this with unnervingly adult seriousness, then nodded. "The mountain is getting louder. They need to fix the machines before it gets too loud." Tim helped Emma into his truck. As they continued upward, her responses to his questions were minimal and cryptic, frequently returning to comments about the machines and the mountain getting louder. Tim noticed Emma showed no signs of being cold, despite her inadequate clothing, just the light red jacket over summer weight clothing. Finally, the research station came into view, a cluster of utilitarian buildings near the summit, surrounded by antenna arrays and monitoring equipment. No other vehicles were visible in the parking area, which struck Tim as odd. How had Emma's parents reached the station without transportation? "Is this where your parents are?" Tim asked as he guided his truck into the loading zone. Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the main building. "They're inside, fixing the machines." Tim helped Emma from the cab and approached the station's entrance, noting with growing discomfort that the facility appeared completely deserted. No lights shone from within, no sounds of activity carried on the gusty wind. The main door was unlocked, swinging open to reveal a reception area, showing signs of hasty abandonment. Coffee cups still half full on desks, computers left powered on, a jacket draped over a chair. "Hello?" Tim called out, his voice echoing through empty space. "Anyone here? I've got Emma with me." No response came. Tim looked down at the girl, who stood calmly beside him, apparently unsurprised by the station's deserted state. "Where are your mom and dad, Emma?" "The listening room," she replied without hesitation, pointing toward a hallway. "Where they hear the mountain." Something was very wrong. A deserted research station, abandoned car, child left alone. None of it made sense. Tim's cell phone showed no service, and the station's landline gave only dead air when he lifted the receiver. In the administrative office, Tim found a framed photograph on the desk, a family portrait showing a middle-aged couple with young blonde girl standing in front of this very station. The girl was unmistakably Emma, the date printed in the corner, October 17, 2019, almost exactly 2 years earlier. "Emma," Tim said carefully, showing her the photograph. "Is this you? And your parents?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Before the mountain started talking." Tim's skin prickled with dread. He searched the reception area until he found a newspaper clipping preserved under plastic. The headline read, "Research Station Tragedy. 3 presumed dead in White Mountain landslide." The article described how a catastrophic landslide had buried part of the station after unusual seismic activity 2 years earlier. Among those presumed dead were Dr. Robert Harlow, Dr. Linda Harlow, and their 6-year-old daughter, Emma. Tim turned to where Emma had been standing, but the reception area was empty. From somewhere deeper in the facility came a child's laughter, followed by distinct rumble of movement within the mountain itself. A deep vibration Tim felt through his boots. Warning lights began flashing on monitoring equipment. Outside, wind intensity increased dramatically, clouds racing across darkening sky. Tim ran back to his truck, hands shaking. The ground beneath trembled, small stones skittering across the parking area. He started the engine just as the first major vibration hit. As Tim maneuvered his truck to leave, he caught a final glimpse of the station in his mirror. Emma stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the building's dark interior. She raised her hand in farewell, and then the entire world seemed to shudder. The descent became a nightmare of screaming engine brakes and hairpin turns, taken far faster than safety would dictate. Twice, Tim nearly lost control as tremors intensified. He passed the spot where the white sedan had been parked, but the vehicle had vanished. When Tim finally reached the main highway and regained cell service, he immediately contacted authorities. Search and rescue teams were dispatched, but couldn't reach the station until the following morning due to a severe localized storm. What they found matched almost exactly the scenario from 2 years earlier. A massive landslide had obliterated most of the facility. The official report classified the incident as natural disaster. Tim's experience was documented, but largely dismissed as product of stress and oxygen deprivation at high altitude. Timothy Garland no longer accepts deliveries to remote mountain locations. He restricts his routes to major highways and well-traveled roads. He has shared his experience only with few trusted fellow drivers, most of whom react with polite skepticism. But occasionally, Tim encounters another driver who falls silent at his story, someone who has experienced their own inexplicable moment on America's isolated routes, places where boundaries between present and past, between life and memory, seem to thin under certain conditions. In these moments of shared understanding, the unspoken question hangs between them. What happens when ordinary people brush against the extraordinary while simply trying to do their jobs? And how do they continue driving forward, knowing what waits on certain forgotten roads? Alec Morrison had hauled freight across the Midwest for 16 years. At 43, his Freightliner Cascadia felt more familiar than his own living room, every vibration alerting him to problems before dashboard warnings appeared. Unlike drivers preferring predictable interstates, Alec navigated challenging secondary highways. He knew which county roads saved time, when weather closed major arteries, and which small towns had honest mechanics. This knowledge led him to accept a delivery from Des Moines to Kearney, Nebraska. With I-80 partially closed by an accident, most traffic faced lengthy detours. But Alec knew an alternative: state and county roads that would bypass the closure, adding only 90 minutes. He departed Des Moines at noon on a Tuesday in late October, ignoring his GPS's official detour. Within an hour, he left traveled highways behind, his truck rumbling across endless harvested fields. Alec maintained a mental map of fuel stops along his route. Rural America had seen many small-town stations close, creating fuel deserts, stretches where running low meant serious trouble. As evening approached, Alec determined he had enough fuel to reach Grand Island, but he would be cutting it closer than he liked on unfamiliar sections of his improvised route. Nebraska State Road 38 was in good condition, allowing him to maintain 55 mph despite occasional farm equipment. Traffic was minimal, mostly local pickups and tractors. About 40 miles east of Grand Island, as dusk approached, Alec encountered unexpected signs. Detour ahead, followed by State Road 38 closed. Follow detour. Orange barriers directed traffic onto a county road heading north. Alec checked his GPS, which showed the county road eventually reconnecting with his planned route after 15 miles. He followed the detour onto County Road 23, immediately noticing the complete absence of other vehicles. The sudden isolation felt strange after the moderate traffic of the state highway. The road condition was the second unusual aspect. Unlike the well-maintained state highway, this county road showed significant neglect. Crumbling shoulders, faded center lines, and patched asphalt creating a washboard effect. As darkness fell, Alec switched on his high beams, illuminating a deteriorating road. He hadn't seen another vehicle since turning onto the detour, and his cell phone showed no service. His fuel gauge now showed just under a quarter tank, sufficient to reach Grand Island, but with less margin than preferred. 8 miles into the detour, Alec encountered another sign. Detour continues. Turn right. This was unexpected. His GPS showed County Road 23, continuing straight for several more miles. Alec stopped, considering his options. His headlights revealed road closed barriers beyond the detour sign. With reluctance, Alec turned right onto CR 17B, where the surface transitioned to packed gravel, forcing him to reduce speed to 30 mph. The new road curved through subtly changed terrain, flat farmland giving way to more varied topography, with occasional stands of trees creating pools of darkness that swallowed his headlights. After driving what should have been enough distance to reconnect with his original route, Alec consulted his GPS again. The screen showed him traveling through empty space. No road indicated where he was clearly driving. The fuel situation concerned him. Constant slowing, turning, and accelerating had increased consumption. The gauge now hovered just above the 1/8 mark, entering emergency territory. The next detour sign appeared without warning. Detour continues. Turn left, directing him onto an even smaller dirt track. Alec stopped completely, exiting the cab to inspect beyond the detour markers. In his flashlight beam, he could see no obvious reason for another detour. No construction equipment, no washed-out culverts, no barriers beyond the portable signs. Something felt increasingly wrong. Multiple detours on minor rural roads were unusual, especially with no apparent roadwork. Alec attempted to call his dispatcher, but his phone still showed no service. The truck's satellite communication system displayed an error message. Alec decided to continue straight on CR 17B, bypassing the detour signs. After approximately 2 miles, Alec noticed a faint glow in the distance. A building stood alone beside the road, its parking area marked by a single streetlight. A sign read, "Last Chance Gas and General Store." Relief flooded through him. He guided his truck onto the gravel parking area, noting no other vehicles despite the open sign glowing in the window. The building seemed oddly anachronistic, a wooden structure with a false front, reminiscent of frontier-era architecture. The gasoline pumps appeared surprisingly modern by contrast. Inside, Alec found an elderly man with steel gray hair behind the counter. "Evening," the old man said. "Run into the detours, did you?" Alec nodded. "Getting low on fuel. You have diesel?" "Sure do. Pump number 3. As Alec prepared to return to his truck, he asked, "What's with all the detours? I didn't see any actual road work." The old man's expression shifted subtly. "Department of Transportation issue. Something about soil testing. Been going on for nearly a month now." Returning to his truck, Alec noticed movement in his side mirror. A woman standing at the edge of the streetlight's reach. She appeared to be in her 30s, wearing oddly formal clothing for the setting, a dark blouse and skirt, more suited to an office than a rural gas station. She raised one hand in what seemed a warning gesture, then pointed toward the road continuing beyond the store, shook her head emphatically, and instead gestured back the way Alec had come. Before Alec could respond, the store's door opened. The elderly proprietor emerged, looking around as if searching for something. His gaze passed directly over the spot where the woman stood, showing no recognition of her presence. After a moment, he returned inside. The woman repeated her gestures with greater urgency, pointing back the way Alec had come, then drawing her finger across her throat in the universal gesture for danger. Alec started his engine, but instead of pulling forward to the diesel pump, he executed a careful turn to exit the parking area the way he had entered. As his headlights swept across where the woman had stood, he found only empty gravel. She had vanished. With growing unease, Alec accelerated back onto CR-17B, heading in the direction from which he had arrived. His fuel gauge hovered just above critical, but some instinct told him that returning to the state highway was preferable to whatever lay ahead. Alec retraced his path, bypassing detour signs. Contrary to the warning signs, the road appeared perfectly passable. After approximately 3 miles, he saw a green reflective sign announcing State Road 38, 2 miles. As Alec finally merged back onto the state highway, his fuel warning light illuminated. According to his onboard computer, he had approximately 30 miles of range remaining, enough to reach Grand Island if he maintained steady speed. True to his calculations, Alec rolled into a truck stop with his engine sputtering from near empty tanks. After refueling, he contacted his dispatcher to report the unusual detours. To his surprise, he was informed that no official detours were active on State Road 38. The highway department confirmed the road was fully open, with no construction planned. 2 days later, Alec deliberately routed his return journey through the same area in daylight. State Road 38 showed no evidence of recent construction or detour signs. When he located what should have been the turnoff for County Road 23, he found only an unmarked dirt access road, clearly unsuitable for commercial traffic. Most disturbing of all, when Alec asked about the Last Chance Gas and General store at a local diner, longtime residents informed him that no such establishment existed anywhere in the county. The only gas station that had operated on County Road 17B had closed in 1994 after its elderly owner disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The building had burned to the ground years ago, leaving nothing but a concrete foundation overgrown with prairie grasses. Alec Morrison still drives the secondary highways of the Midwest, but he no longer deviates from known, mapped routes after dark, and he keeps his fuel tank topped off with obsessive regularity, never allowing it to drop below half. Some roads, he learned, exist in a different reality after sunset, detours that lead not to alternate routes, but to places that emerge only when darkness and isolation create the perfect conditions for them to materialize. Places where strangers might offer warnings that save your life, if you're wise enough to heed them. Thanks for sticking with us all the way to the end. Your support truly makes a difference. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to hit like, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss another story. A huge thank you to our sponsors for keeping the lights on and the wheels turning. We couldn't do this without you. Until next time, stay safe on the road, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones we tell ourselves.